Good morning. In the name of God, the one and holy Trinity. Please be seated. One week ago today, on July 4th, I was looking at a video I had taken of holiday fireworks. My daughter, my mother, my sisters, and my many nephews and I were celebrating Independence Day together, as my family has done since my very early childhood. And the bright reds and the arcing trajectory of the bursts of light on the video were bold and they were stirringly beautiful. And I wanted to share the sense of connection I felt to my country by posting the video on Instagram. But I hesitated. Because there are some weeks when I don't know who I am in this country, and I lose sight of this country's future. And I wonder if its past ever existed. There are times when I pick up the news and I put it back down again in sheer anguish, because I do not want to acknowledge the arrogant cruelty of the powerful whom I encounter on my news stream. There are moments when I wonder, and perhaps you do too, how to acknowledge without turning away the moral emptiness of the way we ourselves cling to status and power. Like many of us, I grew up with a strong belief in the goodness of the democratic process and the power of the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence. But I also read Black voices that tell me that this past July 4th was not their Independence Day. And I know that when all men were created equal, neither women like me nor people of color were counted in that number. And so for all these reasons, there are weeks, days, and moments when I do not know which way is up or who I am as an American. In this morning's reading from Amos, the prophet says that God was standing beside a wall holding a plumb line. A plumb line is a cord with a weight attached to its bottom, so that when the cord hangs freely, it achieves an exact vertical. God, the holy architect, built Israel with a plumb line, but now God tells Amos the people of Israel have sinned and fallen away. The people have fallen out of plumb. Amos reports God's truth to the powerful elite of Israel. And in fear, the elite threaten Amos's life. God's laws are the plumb line, the truth from which Israel has fallen away, and the people are leaning precariously out of vertical. In this morning's gospel reading, we encounter Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, who came to rule over Galilee a few years before the birth of Jesus. So let's hold God's plumb line in hand as we look at Herod. At the end of the day, Herod is shown to be a monstrous, self-serving man whose fear of loss of power drives him to a grotesque and brutal murder. But the story of Herod's encounter with John the Baptist is so familiar to us, we may have lost touch with the mindless evil that it reveals. Though Herod was Jewish, he ruled as a client of Rome and his relations with his Jewish subjects were full of tension. Herod had divorced his first wife to marry Herodias, the wife of his half-brother, which his Jewish subjects saw as sinful. And so then John the Baptist comes along and he condemns Herod's divorce and remarriage. And so Herod has him bound and imprisoned because he doesn't like that. He doesn't want to have to hear that. And as with Amos, John's truth was inconvenient for the men in power. Like the elite of Amos's time, Herod holds his power tightly, and he very much fears its loss. As a ruler of Galilee, Herod has great power and wealth, and yet he lives in fear both of an uprising among the Jewish people whom he rules and of all the Romans to whom he is in thrall. Herod has the gleam of success and celebrity about him. He throws a great banquet at court to celebrate his own birthday, inviting young girls, including his stepdaughter, to dance. And you've heard of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde used the name Salome for Herod's stepdaughter in his popular play of that same name. And then Richard Strauss followed suit in his famous opera Salome. And you may even have heard of the works featured in the dance of the seven, these works featured the dance of the seven veils, portraying as erotic the dance that Salome performed before Herod, pleasing him and his guests. And so through the centuries, the young Salome has come to represent in popular culture the seductive power of female sexuality. The popular story suggests that we should not blame poor Herod for what happened. Just consider the wiles of this young woman whose erotic power overcame his judgment. Easier this than blame the man in power. But consider what really happened. Confident in his power, impressed by her dance, Herod foolishly promises his young stepdaughter anything she desires. Rule number one, never trust a teenager with that much power. Rule number two, if you are stupid enough to break rule number one, don't follow through without regard to your responsibility. After all, if your 13-year-old asked you for the head of your nemesis on a platter, would you do it? Herod has listened to John the Baptist, and he has a choice to either stand plumb with God or fall aside. When he concedes to Salome's gruesome demands for the head of John the Baptist on a platter, Herod plunges into evil. And Mark tells us he has honored his promise out of regard for his oaths and for his guests. In other words, to keep face, he forsakes his relationship to God and to his neighbors, the most basic tenets of Jewish and Christian faith. The plumb line has swung far from center. And Herod remains blind to, he refuses to take responsibility for his actions. He decides he must maintain his status, even at the cost of a murder so horrible, we're still talking about it 20 centuries later. And so there are moments when I forget who I am, and I must question the narratives I was given as a child. Such a time came again recently when a childhood hero of mine fell from grace. As a young kid, I dreamt of being an 18th century pioneer. I read books about Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, and I adopted a frontiersman slang that utterly confused my parents. So I was disheartened a few weeks ago to learn that Davy Crockett never died an heroic death at the Texas Alamo. And my heart sunk even lower this week when right-wing leaders in Texas engineered the cancellation of an event for a book examining the role of slavery at the Battle of the Alamo. The book tells a new story, about race and power in our country. It's a narrative that, like the voice of John the Baptist or of Amos, that the people in power don't want heard, lest it threaten the treasured narrative that sustains their understanding of their place in society and the world. Thus, it always seems to be with elites. In the time of Amos, in the time of John, in our time, power tends to corrupt, and the powerful elites don't want to hear a message that threatens their status and self-worth. But then remember Amos. God sets a plumb line for the people of Israel, and for us today in a post-isolation pandemic world. It swings back and forth, south to north, before it comes to rest. But it is always there for us, leading us, tending us. And I believe that Jesus helps us find our plumb line. Its vertical resting place is a life lived, aligned to God, a life lived for the love of and service to our neighbors in all their diversity. And I hope we will find the courage to look honestly at our fears and look at our shadows. We will always be afraid of what is new, of the challenges to those things that are our comfort zones. But to know ourselves through the light of Christ is the way to be sure that we are plumb and unafraid to look at what is new and what frightens us. Let us walk plumb with God. Amen.